Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to this very exciting episode of Diving Deep. My aim always is to bring in people who can expand our thinking, let us think differently out of the box, and sometimes they speak for us because there are so many things we want to speak, we want to say, but we need that medium who can speak for us. Two of the most amazing ladies, Sadia and Fatima Seedat, are joining us today from Cape Town in South Africa. And they are really, really esteemed ladies for me because they're doing amazing work in the field of Islam and for the rights of women. So, Dr. Fatima Seedat, she is Associate Professor and Head of the Department of African Feminist Studies at the University of Cape Town. And Sadia Shaikh is Professor in the Study of Religions at the University of Cape Town. She specializes in the study of Islam, gender ethics, and feminist theory. And they have together authored and compiled this beautiful book, the Woman's Khutbah book. I believe that Sadia is also an author of a book before this one. It's called The Sufi Narratives.
Sufi Narratives of Intimacy, Ibn Arabi, Gender and Sexuality.
Wow, yes, that sounds really exciting. I can't wait to read that one after I'm done reading this phenomenal book here. I was in such a rush to get my hands on this book that I didn't wait for the paperback or the hardcover. I just got the Kindle version, and it has really, really been such an immersive read. Let's get to the point without further ado. How about let me ask you my first question. What is this book about, the Women's Khutbah, and enlighten us?
So the first thing is to greet all your people who are watching or listening. I'm not very familiar with podcasts. I think it's my first time on one. So I think the first thing is to greet and say hello. And yes, to answer your question, Fatima, what we've decided is rather than answering in our words, we thought we'd take your listeners to the actual text, the actual book. So what is the khutbah, Woman's Khutbah book? It is a collection of khutbahs from women who've written these khutbahs. And so let me just get you into the first one, and that will give you an idea of what it is. I'll take you into the actual khutbah that was written by one of the women who contributed to the book. And thereafter, Sadia will take you through the biography of the person who contributed, because that's the other part of the book. And then finally, we'll talk also about what the meaning is of putting these two together in the way we understand how people live out the Quran, right? And live out what it means to be Muslim. So let me start with a khutbah by Shaykh Omo. Shaykh Omo writes this khutbah, and it begins with the word Iqra. Read, speak, and teach. And quoting from the Quran, Shaykh Omo says, read in the name of your Lord who created. The divine command to read and speak his truth was the first word revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, brought by the angel Jibreel for humankind. This enabled humanity with guidance to learn and preach the wisdom of scripture. This initial summons descended upon Prophet Muhammad's heart as a mercy to all. In the words of the Quran, I have sent you only as a mercy for the universe. The words sent to him are destined to all as a single humanity without discrimination. This is the message from Shaykh Omo. She says that the revelation in Surah Rahman that states that the most merciful taught the Quran, created the human and taught him eloquence, takes us back to the filtering point, the main purpose for creation, which is to speak eloquently in loving guidance. She explains that standing in the pulpit to share and receive the truth is a calling incumbent on all human beings, male and female. Muslim women's authority, she explains, the authority to teach, guide, and deliver sermons is our inherent gift, part of being originally insan. And she continues in khutbah to say that the divine wisdom informs us of a unique soul from which creation sprang forth, and the human path being that of return The cycle is complete only when one reaches again that fundamental oneness, the single state that emanated from the deistic beatitude. And there are some beautiful words that come through in the khutbahs. I'll say that again. The single state that emanated from the deistic beatitude is that state free from duality and separation. The condition of being embodied by this khutbah giving servant. How can we imagine ourselves as khutbah giving servants of Allah? When one has been set on the route of conveying the commands, the exhortations, the oaths and promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is incumbent for the chosen servant to polish the vessel of reception and dispensation. And what is that? That is the self, so that the self can mirror the divine truth. On a more personal note, Shaykh Umar tells us that the wisdom of Quran through the mystical trail of Sufism provides a method for attaining such a state of receptivity. Such a state has an axial point, she says, around which rotates the idea of the genderless soul. And this is a lovely concept, the genderless soul, that single, original, unified soul, or a nafs al-wahida. And then Shaykh Umar's khutbah goes into talking about women at the time of the Prophet. And she has a lovely reference here to his beloved wife, mother of the believers, Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, as a reputed scholar in Medina. The Muslim community was instructed by Rasulullah to take lessons of one half of their religion from Aisha. And then she also speaks about Salama, who led women in ritual prayer and lent him support in his religious mission. And then she speaks about what happened at Hudaybiyah, once again when Salama was available and offered guidance. And through this khutbah is how Shaykh Umar begins to share her message with us, her message of what it means to be, like she says, part of what it means, what the woman's khutbah book means. It means to position ourselves as khutbah giving servants. And I'll let Sadia speak to who Shaykh Umar actually is as a person.
Assalamu alaikum, Fatima, and to all the listeners of this podcast. It's wonderful to be here. And specifically, it's our very first book talk on this. So alhamdulillah, we're very excited to be here. So, Fatima started this khutbah that is kind of the opening khutbah of our book, and quite a powerful one. And what we've done is we've accompanied the khutbah together, after the khutbah, each of the khatibas have given a personal essay. And the idea of this is to show how knowledge is produced through a life journey. What is the journey to giving the khutbah, and how one's life experience enlivens, informs, is basically the matrix, the kind of the womb around which knowledge emerges. And so Senegalese Sufi Sheikha of the Tijani order, and she tells us that she grew up in this very loving Sufi family in Senegal. Her father was a very prominent political figure, actually, the vice president of the Congress at the time, but he was also the sheikh, a sheikh in the Tijani Tariqa. Her mum was a nurse and did a lot of charity work. She headed up a charity foundation, and she later served as the first female president of the Tijani Women's Sufi order in Dakar, Senegal. And so she describes in her bio the seamless ways in which religion and spirituality were part of the daily routine. She says, as children, they would be, just taking care of people. That was just part of how religion worked. She traveled to study as an adult. She traveled to study at an American university and started a business career in the US. And then she met a Sufi sheikha in the US, the sheikha of the Halvati Jerahi Sufi order. And this is, I would like to quote her. My beautiful teacher, Sheikha Fariha, was a vessel for dispensing Allah's mercy. Her profound guidance and teachings led me to experience many spiritual openings bathed in divine grace. And after years of training with my Jerahi family and building on my Tijani background, I received the authority and the permission to guide seekers to the love of God as a sheikha. And then she goes on to say, So she has these two different learning models. She has her mother, who was the head of a Tijani women's group, and then Sheikha Fariha, and of course her father, who was also the head of a Tijani tariqa. And she goes on to say, times were different in my mum's day. Female leadership tended to err on the side of being subtle and cautious, women accepting their lot to be overshadowed by men. But my training with a female teacher in a non-traditional North American community made it more natural for me to assert and mirror the leadership of my beautiful teacher, Sheikha Fariha. I firmly believe in the crucial value of female spiritual models for young women in all journeys they undertake. And I think this is a critical kind of, position that, in fact, one of the reasons that we've created this book or collated this book and thought through this book is precisely for the kinds of role modeling it will allow for young women. And so she states this very explicitly. She says, female teachers in Muslim societies do not always enjoy broad support, but we must be reassured of Allah's support and guidance always. And she says, I've never really feared the challenges on my path, nor have I spent time grieving failures. These are inevitable. Sheikha says, I have surrendered my will to God's and constantly work to be free from praise or from blame. I have always hoped for divine sustenance along with guidance. To me, this is the central meaning of Islam. So that is an excerpt from Sheikha Omar's biography.
Wow. Before we move on, I just want to add a little bit here that it's so amazing how your book, inshallah, is coming to fill a void for young women, especially who are aspiring, who are looking for answers. It is only natural that, we as women will aspire and relate better with a female role model, in so many walks of life. And what I really, really liked to go beyond the bias, the gender bias, and look at the real light that is seeking divine light, the light within all of us. And so to not, to not discriminate on the basis of that, because then we discriminate on the dissipation of knowledge, the circulation of information. We kind of color it with certain biases, and then we don't value it in the same way. We don't give it in the same way that it deserves to be dissipated and given out. We don't have so many women talking about a religion, talking about Islam from a place of authority and assertion. So when you were talking about the biography, it was really interesting to see how she highlighted this, that I did not get disturbed by these norms which come with women leadership. And Marianne Williamson says that when one person shines their light, it gives courage to others to shine their own light as well. And Hazrat Ali says that we were born free, do not be a slave. So brilliant. Thank you. Please carry on.
Fatima, sorry, if I can just add in there. I mean, I think that reference also, I think this idea of role models is really powerful and important. And this idea also of retrieving the history, retrieving the history of all of these powerful women, which many of our khatibas have done. One of them very poignantly asks, there's a woman who stops the Khalif Omar and says, don't retract the mahar that we were given by the Quran and by the Prophet ﷺ. And she asks very powerfully, who of us will stop the male leaders in our community and speak out in those voices? So we actually have those role models.
Beautiful. Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's quite critical.
So to reclaim this space that women were given by the Prophet, that on the basis of your intellect, there's no differentiation. So if a woman finds something intellectually barring, then she can also question it. It should not be a matter of gender when it comes to the intellect, and that's really powerful. Yes, thank you.
Certainly, Fatima. So to keep answering your question, what is the Woman's Khutbah book? You've heard the khutbah, and then you've heard the biography. So here's the work that Sadia and I did in the middle of all of that, bringing that together. And part of that was that we looked at these khutbahs, pulled them together into themes, and then tried to see what they were teaching. So what is the ethics? What is the kind of engagement people are having with the texts, with being Muslim, living as Muslim? And we first framed them under three categories. The khutbahs work within the idea of feminist ontology, ideas of Rahma and Adal. And a second category is about subjectivity and consciousness, which is about ihsan. And a third about sociality and difference, which is about maslaha. Right? The fourth is called resisting injustice, and that we capture as ummah and ubuntu, right? A very South African concept.
Yes,
So
it's a
what we're
beautiful
going to
Can I also request you to just really unpack these different categories in very
Yes.
simple layman terms?
That's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to do it in lay people's terms, Fatima.
Yes.
That we can all know about it. But yeah, so what I want to offer you from Sheikh Omar's khutbah is to speak about Rahman Adal. Now, these khutbahs in this section present a vision of humanity arising from a single undifferentiated soul and nafs wahida, without duality and separation. They reflect the primordial human state. The origin of the humanity in the genderless unified self emerging from the all-encompassing one is the archetypal condition through which each person derives their mandate as moral agent in the world. Khalifatullah fil ard. Justice and the equality of each life is thus grounded in our deepest spiritual moorings. And this is what comes from the khutbahs. Many of the khutbahs remind us that this universal mode of humanity, imbued with the transformative spiritual insights of revelation, are what inspired early Muslim women in the prophetic community to engage in all spheres of public life. The khutbahs here aim at rekindling an approach to revelation that was pushed back, and this is our argument, that was pushed back by the unfortunate tide of patriarchal interpretation of scripture. Right? We think there was a moment where this happened, or there was a process through which this happened. And retrieving models of powerful women into our current time and space serves the function to reframe our modes of engagement with tradition. They encourage dynamic forms of religious subjectivity, what it means to be religious. And they respond to our contextual need for greater social justice. That is the work of one group of the khutbahs.
Right. Thank you so much for that explanation. So I think that we're going through a wave of awakening throughout the planet, where women are kind of understanding intellectually, that there is no difference when it comes to social justice. There shouldn't be any difference when it comes to social justice between the genders. So please enlighten us how your book is going to answer these questions for us.
So we're going to move specifically in response to that question, Fatima, the next khutbah, which speaks to what it means to be a human being. What is your subjectivity? By a astounding Indonesian khatibah called The Gift of the Four Human Births, is what I'm going to read from now. I'm going to read from this khutbah. Bismillah. In this khutbah, I will show that humans are born 4 times during their lives in the journey to becoming fully human and realizing the deepest message of Islam. First, a person experiences biological birth, when a fetus develops and a new human body arrives out of her mother's womb. Allah reminds us in the Quran that by remembering the hardships endured by our mothers, the bearers of our existence, and by expressing appreciation to her, we give thanks to Allah. The second birth, Dr. Noor Rufia tells us, that the human being experiences is spiritual birth. The human is a creature like any other that has a body. After death, the body is devoured by the earth, yet the spirit remains alive and must take full responsibility for the life the human has led. Thus, the most important identity of the human being is as a spiritual being. Every human being has a distinct and inherent subjectivity as a servant only of Allah. When we fully recognize that we are created to be a servant only of Allah, that we are never to be servants to any other person or relationship, whether marital, family, work-related, or any other social relationships, then we are experiencing spiritual birth. The third birth the human being experiences is social birth. In addition to our inherent spiritual status, we also have a mandate as Khalifa fil Ard, the recipients of the divine amana, or the divine trust on earth, as the Quran tells us, to realize and embody the greatest benefit for all creation. When we realize that every human being, male and female, has an obligation to treat themselves and other people with respect and dignity, with maslahah, at best as they can, then we actually are experiencing the social birth. So we truly come into our social being. The fourth birth that the human beings experience is an intellectual birth. Unlike other creatures, humans have been given minds and hearts to consider what is and what is not permissible, what is good and not good, what is appropriate and inappropriate, in our capacity as servants of Allah, gifted with the mandate to realize the greatest maslahah for everybody and for the earth. We all have unique life conditions. We may be responsible for children or parents, we may be healthy, sick, we may be in a normal situation or experiencing a crisis. Like the diversity of such conditions, not everything allowed by religion is always good. Humans are required to use their minds and hearts to discern whether an action permitted by religion is good or not, in accordance with the specific conditions of their lives. In answer to the question that the intellect poses, the heart and mind must indicate beyond doubt that the action is good, tayyiban. When we experience the mind and the heart in this way, we experience true intellectual birth. Finally, because social conditions continually change, what is good in one place is not necessarily good or appropriate in the other. One action might be appropriate and permissible in one place and at a certain time, yet in a different place and a different time, the same action may not be appropriate. Therefore, we are required to use our minds and our hearts to discern what's ma'aruf in a particular moment, to enjoin the good. And this capacity to discern wisely for a suitable response is part of the inherent status and mandate with all other human beings as both servant of Allah and as Khalifa fil Ard. When the awareness arises to continuously use our hearts and our minds as best as we can, we take actions that are halal, tayyib, and with ma'aruf, then we have been born into our intellectual or right-mindedness. So, beloved congregants, she says, our first birth as a human is a necessity, and it is Allah who determines where we are born and from which woman's womb. However, the next three births, spiritual, social, and intellectual, are entirely in our own hands and within the realms of our endeavors and choices as human beings. There are people, should I stop there? Okay. There are people who, until death arrives, function solely as physical beings, their lives occupied in the pursuit of physical happiness. They forget God and forget the happiness of others, and they can do a lot of damage. Conversely, some people experience the four births from an early age, and their presence then becomes a gift to everyone that surrounds them. That in the same way that a child is a gift to her parents, a parent's a gift to the child, a husband a gift to the wife, a wife a gift to the husband, a trader a gift to the buyer, buyer a gift to the trader, a leader a gift to his people, the people a gift to their leader. Humans who exist as gifts to themselves, their family, and other lives are in fact giving birth to themselves in the fullest extent. This is the heart of Islam in accordance with the mission of our Rasul, who the Quran describes as Rahmatul Alameen. And Fatima was going to do the biography on this.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It was really enlightening, and it's so amazing how Rumi says, if Mary didn't go through pains of labor, Jesus would not be born. So each one of us have to go through the pains of birthing ourselves so that, that inner prophet, that enlightened being is born through us, is what Rumi means to say by that each one of us is a Mary, each one of us have to give birth to that new being within us that is waiting to, manifest itself. And like you said, we decide that. That's part of our free will, how far we want to grow and how much ascension we want to experience. Thank you so much.
And the question of choice in that is absolutely critical.
Okay, so now we move from the content of the khutbah to who is the person that has produced the khutbah, right? So now we're going to talk about Dr. Nur Rufiya. Dr. Nur Rufiya is an Indonesian Muslim scholar. She's a lecturer at the Institute of Qur'anic Studies in Jakarta, and she teaches there. She says, all my fellow male lecturers are offered the opportunity to be khatibs, as are my male students. I, however, am not offered this opportunity. Instead, I am positioned as a tafsir lecturer of khatibs. Sorry, a tafsir lecturer of khatibs in training at this institute, right? I therefore can conclude that the only capital I do not have to become a khatib, prepare for what she has to say, the only capital I do not have for what it takes to be a khatib is a penis. I am not biologically male, she says, which unfortunately for me counts as an absolute social condition for my exclusion. Ironically, as a woman with all the educational qualifications, I can teach male khatibs, but I'm not allowed to perform the khutbah in my community. She goes on to explain that the majority of Indonesian society is Muslim, and many Muslim religious platforms are available for women. For example, as preachers on national TV, for administrators in the Indonesian Ulama Council, as lecturers at universities with mixed students or men-only students. They are even heads of Islamic institutes, private and public. And they are owners of the Pesantren, which is the Islamic boarding schools, which are in Indonesia. So women perform informal religious duties, such as thanksgiving for pregnancy, birth, circumcision, graduation, marriage, commemoration of the death, even religious holidays or giving religious advice. But they cannot perform the Friday khutbah or any other sermons in front of men. Nur notes that her contribution to the book has sparked within her the idea of compiling her own collection of Friday khutbahs. And she says, potentially publishing it under a male-sounding pseudonym so that it'll actually get read.
Yes, as a woman, I think that what we feel when we are deprived of that, position, that equality that we deserve based on our merit, I think only women can understand that and feel it because they're at the receiving end of that treatment. And we're not being unreasonable or being too much when we say that, which is how we're taken. When we start to create this kind of disruption, then we're taken as being too much. Why can't you be satisfied with what you have? But it only takes you to be on the receiving end to truly understand it.
And I think in Nur Rufiya, we have a perfect example, right? She teaches khatibs. Why can't she be a khatiba? Why can't she do what she teaches people to do?
Imagine.
So, right? So it's just an absolute anomaly.
Yes.
But I know that she's not the only woman who's in this position who teaches things she's not allowed to do.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. It's like you're teaching
what's
someone how to swim, but you can't swim yourself.
Oh, you can swim, you're just not allowed to.
Yeah.
You know how, you're just not allowed to.
You're just not allowed to.
So what Sadia is going to do is locate this idea within the tafsir of possibility, within the way in which we see people engaging with Quran and with what it means to be Muslim. So Saad?
All right. So this is the the way in which we've kind of thought about the tafsir of possibility around this group of khutbahs where Dr. Nur Rufia's khutbah is found is around notions of ihsan, subjectivity and consciousness, the notion of an ihsani presence. So this group of khutbahs presents an exploration on the nature of self and subjectivity in relation to being in the world. Our existential capacity is realized when we move beyond our biological birth to the fullness of our conscious birth as spiritual, social, and intellectual beings. When a person unconditionally enacts goodness in the world, their very presence becomes a gift to humanity. The ultimate embodiment of this kind of person is what is known in the tradition as the complete person, or insan al-kamil, the fulfillment of humanity's highest potential. The cultivation or the development of ourselves as a form of ihsan, and it's a beautiful translation that another one of our khatibas gives of ihsan, as beautiful presence, right? So ihsan as beautiful presence happens in the form of everyday interactions and experiences that emerges from a clarity of niyyah, of intention, and of choice, recognizing that human beings are complex versions of their own stories. Such cultivation circumvents or prevents a checklist form of Islam. Instead, ihsan calls us to embark on an internal journey, receptive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in varied and sometimes unanticipated forms, cherishing the unique spiritual gifts that others also embody. In giving up on our fixed constructions of reality, we become open to new forms of knowledge and to our own primordial given fitrah of God's hidden treasure within each human heart. Such forms of the self, or such understandings of the self, draw on the Quran as an intimate companion on the journey of spiritual unveiling. Self-cultivation or self-development or spiritual tazkiyah has profound implications for how we engage the world and other lives. It is shaped through relationships with other people and bears fruit in the realms or in the areas of society, public virtue, and communal ethics. Indeed, the personal and the spiritual are profoundly political. And so this group of khutbahs where Dr. Nur Rufia's is found is a whole set of khutbahs that really says this kind of inner cultivation is not something we do quietly, spiritually on the side in our little, yes, we do it. We do all of this adhkar, and we do khalwa, and we do all of these important forms of ibadat. But really, all of this is about a seamless relationship between those forms of self-cultivation and how we enact goodness in the world in relationship to other people. So subjectivities are interconnected, and what happens at the spiritual realm must bear fruit in the public realm. So yeah, that's that group of khutbahs.
Beautiful. Yeah, and it's beautiful how you have categorized these important aspects that need a voice. Thank you so much. And absolutely, this is again where we have to go beyond what meets the eye, going beyond the gender bias and remembering that we have to be more essential in our approach than, superficial, more in the essence. Yes, so can I invite Professor Fatima now to take the floor?
Yes, we're moving now to the final set of khutbahs, and Fatima is going to read one of those.
So the final khutbah is from Dr. Nafisa Patel, who is a South African scholar, also a student of Professor Sadia. And Nafisa begins her khutbah with an excerpt from the Quran. It says, it's Surah Takwir. That was what I was looking for, Sadia. وَإِذَا الْمَوْدَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. When the female child is buried alive and man is questioned for what sin has she been killed, right? She explains that Allah points out in this verse one of the most ominous of these signs. When human life is valued unequally or devalued on the basis of gender and social vulnerability as one of the signs of darkness. And she refers to the commentary on Surah At-Taqweer by Sayyid Qutb, who suggests that the violent rhythm in the opening verses of the surah, where everything that is known or familiar is thrown and smashed, that this illustrates the effects of the human heart being pulled apart from everything it associates with safety, security, and protection. This verse highlights the plight of the girl child and the moral impetus toward social justice. It describes the devastating social effects of gender injustice in terms of humanity uprooted from its moral core and its spiritual center. And the forceful articulation of this surah demands action to counter the injustice against those made vulnerable through their gender. And so she calls our attention to the conditions of the girl child in our midst, to the current scourge of rape and other forms of gender-based violence, which cripple our communities. She calls on us to collectively reflect on the condition of our hearts and our consciousness that is reflected in societies that remain so violent to their women, to women within society. In this darkened world, she says, sexual violators hold high offices of leadership. A president of the United States could have said that he could grab women by their genitals, and his utterances are dismissed as jovial locker room talk. Wealth and status are veneers of first world civility, and they hide so many forms of savagery and brutality. Rape is used as a corrective for those who do not conform to normative ideas of sexuality and what it means to be a good woman. The threat of sexual violence is normalized. Our experiences of being gendered people subjected to these forms of sexual violence are commonplace. Women live with an implicit default of sexual vulnerability and anxiety that not even our grandmothers or our babies are safe from these harms. The societal pandemic devaluing the lives of women is clearly not a pre-Islamic Jahili practice, and this is really important. It is not something purely historical mentioned in the Quran for us to know what used to happen. She says this darkness is our present reality. These brutal occurrences are ayat, or signs demanding our attention. They should be tugging at our hearts, calling us to a deeper consciousness and action. We are guilty, she says. She asks, are we guilty of teaching our daughters to avoid rape? And by that, creating the impression that sexual violations are somehow related to how we dress, or the spaces that our daughters go to, or that it has to do with our daughters' behavior? Do we uncritically use the notions of haya, of modesty, and hijab to teach them protection and prevention against sexual violation? Yet, we fail to also teach our sons not to be violators. We fail to teach our sons not to wound, not to use their voices, their bodies, their physical strength to intimidate and harass. Do we excuse marital rape and domestic abuse? Do we see how women are forced to endure violent relationships because of their financial dependence, because they don't have safe alternatives, or because they fear stigmatization in our communities? How many women remain married because the stigma of divorce is too much to bear? Are we among those who encourage women to stay in toxic marriages with this warped idea that a woman's patience with marital abuse somehow reflects her piety, and with the idea that such marriages are acceptable and are somehow divinely sanctioned in the social order that privileges those who are married and privileges male rights?
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah, every word worthy of deliberation. And
Words of Dr. Nafisa Patel. Yeah.
yes, thank you for sharing her her words with us, which is the voice of so many women. And if we look at the Holy Prophet, and we see his character, we don't see him legitimizing any kind of violation like this, or speaking in the way patriarchal voices have reinterpreted the Prophet's orthodox religion, if I can say that, because the original Islam came as a harbinger of good news for the women. It came as the first monotheistic religion that actually gave the women the right to divorce, and yet over the years that very right has been jeopardized. It's so interesting how patriarchy can hijack women's rights and women's voice, and to shame that voice, to shame the basic right to freedom, basic right to human integrity. And crimes are committed in their evolved ways as time evolves, as humanity evolves. And so this beautiful analogy or metaphor of burying the female child, there are different ways to bury somebody. If earlier it was a physical act, today it's an emotional act. Even though, yes, physical violence persists. However, women, so many times in my society in Pakistan, so many women who are highly educated, they get married, and the male superiority in the family will forbid them from practicing what they've learned. If they've become dentists, they're not allowed to practice their dentistry. If they're doctors, they're not allowed to be doctors, for so many reasons, for so many unfair reasons. They're buried alive like that. Their souls die, and they're subject to emotional abuse, which is not tangible, so it's not considered that big, that important.
Actually, that's a very profound extension that you've made, Fatima, and I think a very legitimate one. Just this idea of how structural violence, what we're really talking about here, right? It's the ways in which all of the potential of women, rape and sexual violence and all of those kind of physical violences are the kind of the real embodied way in which women are harmed. But there's so many other levels that even if you don't experience that extreme form of physical violence, there's ways in which all of these structural forms that don't allow your full humanity the space to flourish and to be fed and to express itself in the world are forms in which women get buried. Who they are get buried. And I think that's a very important and a powerful reflection that you've made on the ways in which our structures in our society are so deeply devastating for the fullness of women's potential. So I'm going to read from Dr. Nafisa Patel's bio. She says that in 2014, I was invited to deliver a pre-khutbah talk at the Claremont Main Road Masjid in its campaign against gender-based violence. This is the masjid that had the first kind of khutbah that Amina Wadud gave in 1994, right? So it's the same one, the same masjid. And she said, after this khutbah, congregants gathered outside to hold a silent vigil for the victims of such violence. We held up placards bearing the names and the ages of most recent victims of gender-based violence. That day was especially meaningful and personally resonant, she says, for several reasons. It was the first time I addressed the congregants of the masjid from the minbar, wrestling with my own insecurities and fear about occupying a space that many in my faith community consider a male-only domain. I had to navigate my uncertain inner voice that questioned my worthiness to bear the responsibility of occupying the space. Reflecting on my thought processes as I prepared for the talk, two motivations stood out. First, I imagined addressing my own 60-year-old self. I thought about what it would have meant to her to have heard from the minbar a message of care, compassion, and outrage at the silent violence occurring in Muslim families and within Muslim communities. I thought of this message that not only acknowledged the reality of her abuse, but also put words to the experience and identified that particular violence, identified it as violence, instead of sweeping it under the carpet, pretending it's not a big deal, or that in fact she was the reason for it. She was blameworthy. The second motivation, Dr. Patel tells us, was the knowledge that my 2 teenage sons would be at the Jumu'ah prayers. I thought about the significance for them and all other young boys and men of hearing the divine message filtered through a female experience. Shifting the aesthetics of the masjid space offers children an enriching pedagogical tool to reflect and to see different embodied leadership models, both men and women as embodied leadership models, real ones. A woman occupying the mimbar space symbolizes and conveys truly an important message of gender equality that resonated with my own convictions. So that's Nafisa's reflection on what kinds of experiences she had in terms of presenting this khutbah.
I'm so grateful that you have shared this, because when you said that she was fighting her own inner voice of feeling uncertain about her worthiness, I feel that we have been shamed into questioning our self-worth when it comes to our intellectual abilities just based on our gender, although I always felt in school girls were doing better academically. I always saw that. I feel like the reason this institution of khutbah, was instilled as part of a weekly communion is because certain aspects of society need to be highlighted and spoken, because when we verbalize it, we give it life, we make it real for so many people. And especially when it comes to emotional abuse, so many of us doubt ourselves. Was I imagining it? Was it really true that I felt this way? Are my feelings valid about this incident? Or am I making it up? Or am I making it too big just because other people don't want to accept it? So, as spiritual warriors and as wayfarers, we, like you said, the 4 stages of birth, women are not given the space to have those births, spiritual birth, intellectual birth. And like the Prophet said, the girl child was buried. That girl child is buried. She's not allowed to live through that evolution of the 4 births. And to like you said, to see a woman speak from the mimbar, it, for me, I think that it would be a beautiful way of bringing that sacredness back to the female, that respect, that importance of her intuitive wisdom, that is the feminine energy that is so lacking now, because we've masculinized everything, structured everything, made everything logical, and the softness of emotion and mercy and love and the kindness, that's missing, because that feminine touch, has been obliterated from the entire system. So, when we see a woman figure for our children, we bring back that reverence for the female back, to respect her and to respect her wisdom instead of trivializing what the women feel or say or intellectualize. So I feel that it's so important.
But just a quick reflection back on that. I mean, I think some people would say, and have said to us in the past, even our kind of history in involvement with Fatima and I, in terms of an inclusive imamat and an inclusive kind of masjid space. Why do you care so much about that? What does it matter who's at the mimbar? Why do we need, we've got more important struggles than women giving khutbahs. The reality is that when we don't see the fullness of the human condition in the most sacred of spaces, it then tells us what is the full human. And so the importance of our sons and daughters walking into a space and both of them being able to recognize that the fullness of human spirituality and all of the births of a human being and the fullness of human experience, including the ways in which women bring to the khutbah uniquely female experiences for reflections of men and women alike, is precisely that kind of wholeness that the inclusive, masjid movements are about. And I think that's really crucial to understand that it's not simply about women taking on leadership roles, but it's about what those leadership roles then implies for the fullness of recognizing and respecting, men and women alike in all of human life, in all of our community spaces. And I think that's quite critical.
Yes. So, the yin and the yang, they have to be balanced. And I feel like there's a huge void in expression of perspectives from the women's side, because of which it seems to me that Muslim men are so unaware of the conditions of the women. Muslim men are so unaware of the way women think, of the way they want to be respected, the way they want to be seen, the way they want to be treated in the society, beyond just being objectified as something that needs to be covered up. And, what that does is that for me, it opens that visual understanding that we take the world, equally together as both the masculine and the feminine. Because when a woman is not seen in places of worship, in leadership roles, it paints a picture of a world where there's a lot that's missing. There are a lot of empty spaces left where women are not taking up those roles. So, for example, a woman can go into space, but a woman cannot be a role model in a mosque, because it's creating an image of Islam that doesn't serve our younger generation. It is taking them away because they don't see equality, they don't see justice.
But in the interest of time, what we're going to do is take you straight to the idea of a tafsir of possibility, because that's one of the things that also define the book. That we've worked through Professor Sadia's idea of a tafsir of experience, and that's very much set out in the book that you were talking about, Fatima, at the beginning. Sufi narratives of intimacy. We've worked through that to move into offering perhaps a next place of how to develop this idea into a tafsir of possibility. So what is a tafsir of possibility? And this is from the book. We explain it as an approach to the text and to the tradition, which is receptive and productive. So it's receiving and it is interested in producing. It's about a posture of being open to seeking out fresh and expanded, as well as constantly expanding modes of justice and inclusivity, right? So it turns on the possibility of always thinking of new ways of knowing and allowing new ways of being to flourish. It's about, at one level, being open to surprise and unpredictability. Importantly, it's about the idea of making room for the unthought to somehow, someday, become thinkable, indeed possible. And why do we say this? We say this because we know that our ideas of justice at any one time are limited. And what we want is to always be open to new and progressive and different forms of justice that become possible in a new time. So to constantly expand this margin of who is in and who is out. And this is what the tafsir of possibility gives us. And I'm going to give it over to Sadia to take us through 3 models of the tafsir of possibility, which we worked out, sourcing women from the Quran as representations of these 3 models.
Beautiful.
Okay, so we suggest that the khatibas in our book are following in the powerful lineage of our Qur'anic ancestors, allowing for openings not considered before they took to the minbar. And they are, we call them our Hajars, our Khawlas, and our Maryams, models that inspire and enable different trajectories of personhood to become and to bloom. We suggest that Hajar and Khawla and Maryam offer Qur'anic archetypes that are open to the unexpected. Through them, suffering and pain are made purposive, and our consciences are urged towards solidarity that's required for systemic transformation, and prompts us to produce action that can change our society. these Quranic ancestors of ours, these female powerful ancestors, create and provide for us paths for religious self-formation and ways to engage the divine and the community in ever-expanding circles of justice. And so in each of these models we've done some Quranic reflection and showed actually how these ideas of women within the heart of Islam, within our Quranic text, provide models for unanticipated stuff, for expanding justice, for expanding personhood, for centering this idea of Khalifa fil ard within female characters within the Quran, and they become then, Fatima and I have theorized, and I think that we leave to our readers to look at the ways in which we've used those three models. We take all of this work that the Khatibas have done, and then we reflect on these Quranic models, and we say, this is a tafsir of possibility. Here's different possibilities for being women. Khawla is the one that contests injustice in the Quran and says to the Prophet, no, sorry, the custom is not good enough. Please go back to Allah. I'm not willing to accept this injustice. So these models of strong women who contest injustice as part of their fitra is our ancestry, is our Quranic ancestry. And so we kind of claim that and bring that to the front in this kind of synthesizing analytical chapter that we do.
Beautiful. It's such a beautiful reminder. I think these are the messages of the Quran that have not been highlighted enough, that need to be brought to the forefront and taken our attention to, because if you look at Maryam and how she's told to enter the temple and pray with those who are bowing, I remember watching a depiction of it in a movie, and it was so powerful to see one woman building all that courage just for her, just in her due obedience to the divine, and being beaten up. She was beaten up for entering the temple and praying with the men. That was there was a hegemony. There's a control over the temple by the men, and she enters it and bows with them. So yeah, it's really powerful, and it really needs to be highlighted. Thank you so much. I would like to Professor Fatima now to give us her concluding remarks for today's brilliant podcast. Yes.
So Fatima, when you asked us to do this podcast, we sat a bit and we thought about how would we do it. And technically, you wanted a podcast for a book launch. And I think we were quite clear we didn't want to launch a book as much as we wanted to continue the project of advocacy that is in the book. And the project that's in the book is a project that is interested in women finding their voice, giving authority to their voice, coming to the minbar, believing that they can be at the minbar, that they ought to be at the minbar, and giving strength to that idea and to that movement that has already begun in our societies. We all have histories of it. We can talk about it in our communities, whether we've had it online, whether we've had it in person. It's been happening. And so what is most significant about the book, and why would a book like this be significant? It's because it's part of a bigger project to bring women, to recognize women's religious authority, that as much as any other person in our society, each of us have the capacity, and we're already doing it, to think about what it means to have a relationship with the divine, what it means to function as a society that is interested in justice, in care, in love, in producing goodness. We do it every day. And we need to give authority to the ways in which we do it. We need to believe those are good ways, those are valuable ways, and not always be looking for direction from outside for this. So in terms of the value of the book and coming and what we hope the book offers, for me, it's part of a longer process of advocacy toward changing the way in which we think and live out our beliefs. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think everything that you said really resonates, and it is an echo of a lot of voices that are unheard. So thank you for coming to the forefront and taking this step, which is a service to a lot of us.
I'll have to say one more thing, and Sada, you can expand on it. I'll just mention it. A really important part about the book is a guide for how to produce a khutbah.
Ooh,
At the
wow.
very back, if you're wondering, anybody's listening, find the book. There's a whole guide at the back, how you can produce your own khutbah. So I'll let Sadia talk about
Yay,
it more.
thank you. I think what is exciting is to actually find it permissible to discuss these ideas as a woman, to even imagine that this could be a possibility one day. I think that is the most exciting thing. Thank you so much.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so
Sadia's
much.
here with you.
Thank you so much
Okay.
for giving your precious time and agreeing to do this with me. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And God
Take
bless
care.
your work. And may you
And
go
thank you
strength to
for the
strength.
opportunity to do this. This is the first time we're going to do it, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Yay. Thank you so much for your time. I'm so grateful for both of you to take out time. Busy schedules, you're traveling also. I feel really honored, and I think the audience have really benefited from this really, really phenomenal conversation that we're doing today, and to many more. Please give us your concluding remarks today, something we can take away.
The one thing that occurred to me, Fatima, firstly, thank you for this podcast. It's been a lovely opportunity. As I said at the get-go, it's our first conversation on this book, so it's very exciting for both Fatima and I. But if I think about the thing that occurred to me at the end of this process, two things. The first thing was that it was a genuine project of sisterly, loving solidarity, that the actual project, in the ways in which we engaged and invited all of the khatibas into this book, and our very extraordinarily talented editorial helper, Roshila Naya, who is a fundamental part of the kind of co-creation of this book, and including the relationship between Fatima and myself. It was a true process of work that was imbued by love, and that really kind of created. So it was also the process that reflected something of our ideals, I think, in quite a integrous way, without kind of thinking about it too much. So alhamdulillah, that was quite beautiful. The other thing that occurred to me, and I mean, as you and your readers will read the khutbahs that are in this book, they are truly, subhanAllah, extraordinarily creative reflections, insights, wisdoms from women that have such a deep apprehension of the divine and have a deep apprehension of themselves, and give all of us, like when I read one or two of the khutbahs, the very hairs on my arms stood up, my heart leapt when I read them, not primarily because it gave me a different vision to imagine my own location in this world in relationship to my Rabb and relationship to other lives. So it's an incredibly creative collection, which is beautiful. And there's the Hadith of Qudsi that I love, and that in some sense came to me at the end of this book, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, I was a hidden treasure and I love to be known. And so I created all of creation in order to be known. And without this being at all around the people, but there's a part of this book that is the way in which the hidden treasure, Allah's beauty and wisdom, gets reflected through the hearts of these particular khatibas. And they're an extraordinary range of women that Fatima and I have been so blessed that have agreed to participate and accepted the invitation into this book. So I see this book as the revelation, the movement for women's inclusivity is happening in pockets, small pockets, but all over the world. So we have inclusive congregations. Sometimes they quietly do their thing. Sometimes there's women's only congregations. Sometimes there's mixed congregations. There are queer congregations. There's all kinds of congregations that are happening. And they happen fairly quietly because people don't want to ruffle feathers. But in some sense, this kind of public book, the statement of extraordinary beauty and power coming from the voices of deeply thoughtful and wise, some of them are extraordinarily thoughtful and wise women in this collection, allow us to imagine the world differently, allow us to imagine what it means to be a human being and what it means to create inclusive communities and to think about justice as an intrinsic part of our spiritual life. That in fact, it is spiritually incongruent to be a patriarch and to be somebody that is truly on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is incongruent to be unjust and on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this book, by its very existence, brings into being and into a concrete form things that have been and ripples of wisdom and beauty that are in different parts of the world. It kind of brings it together. And I think allows, and I hope inshallah this is our niyyah, may the highest of our niyyah be realized, is that it instantiates, it creates a moment of here, there's a solid reflection of what possibilities are available. And inshallah, this will be a source for other women and communities in the future to take flight from it. And not about the specific women. Alhamdulillah, mashallah, they are a beautiful group of women that are here. But it's really not even just about the women. It's about them, but it's not about them. It's about each of us, but also about ways in which we can provide inspiration and resources for our young communities and our future communities to expand our visions of justice and spirituality and being Muslim in the deepest and the most integrous ways that dignify each and every human life with full respect and with full recognition of the divine that is absolutely and integrally present in every single human life and needs to be dignified fully. So, that's kind of my concluding reflections, and I'm very grateful. I think of myself very much as a midwife in the process of birthing this book. But I think of Fatima and myself. I'm not sure that you'd appreciate the analogy, but I think of it very much like that.
No, it's a beautiful analogy, one of the most noblest of professions. Thank you so much from the way you have communicated your passion and the way you are so enthusiastic about this work and this movement. And you have fairly said that in an unjust society is incongruent with the principles of Islam. And the Quran is very clear about how all of us are equal in the eyes of God, except our God wariness, except how we are in our accountability to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I really, really feel inspired by you guys. So you've already impacted me with this beautiful work. And what I want to say in my concluding remarks is that, generally when we have authors speak, in interviews and podcasts, including myself, it's a very self-oriented conversation. I did this and I made this and I wrote this and I feel this and I believe this. But what I found so remarkable in today's podcast is that both of you are so beautifully invested in fixing the crowns of other women, showing to each other how we can build a community that empowers and invests in all human souls, and creates a more egalitarian society, a more, equanimous society where each one is able to be themselves, have this space in the space, of a mosque, within the space of a mosque, to be acceptable the way we are and not be discriminated just because we're biologically different. And I feel that these are the signs of true servants of Allah who are not invested in themselves or, self-flattery, but who are truly invested in bringing about a change beyond themselves. So I'm very, very grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for having my paths cross with you two amazing ladies, to have this honor of, speaking to you. It is a privilege of a lifetime, I think. And I pray that you grow strength to strength, empowering all of us around you with your beautiful light. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fatima. Ameen. Thank you. It was a wonderful opportunity. And thank you for your thoughtful reflections as well, which really kind of built very meaningfully, I think, on some of the reflections that came out of this book. So thank you for that.